now listening to the Arsenal Therapy Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the 15-minute show, part of the Arsenal Therapy Podcast. Today we're going to talk about Noni Madueke, and I'm here with Connor Holden, Chelsea fan and football analyst, to discuss the player that looks like he's on his way to the Emirates. Connor, tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so currently sort of working in the YouTube social media sphere in terms of tactics and writing about tactics, but I've been sort of in and around clubs working in terms of analysis, and doing things at university. I sort of had come through that performance analysis degree, and really I'm just trying to work on bringing that content and that level of insightfulness to more mainstream media.
Yeah, well, it's really great to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to talking Madueke. So he is being linked to Arsenal. You have previously told us that he's a player that you will be disappointed to see go. Why do you think the sentiment around him is so negative from the Arsenal fan base?
I do think it's mainly to do with the positioning, right? I think that if you didn't have literally Bukayo Saka in that position already, then I think a lot of fans would be a little bit easier for it to be digested. I think that it's one of those ones where you look at and you think positional, right? He's a right winger, so maybe it doesn't fit. But I think when you actually break it down and look at qualities that he can add, then maybe you start to realize that he does actually bring something that the squad doesn't necessarily have quite a lot of.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear. I personally think a big part of it is to do with the fact he plays for Chelsea as well. And over the years, we have definitely ended up on the worst end of our transfer dealings. So even going back to Ashley Cole, you give us William Gallas and very little money, and Ashley Cole went on to win everything. So, but I do think some of the business has been overstated. A lot of the players we've got from Chelsea have been at the end of their careers, as opposed to Madueke. He's a player at 23, similar to Havertz coming in, and Havertz has thrived at Arsenal, and I think Madueke could do the same. You mentioned that he plays in the same position as Saka. He can play on the left as well, but talk to me a bit about those qualities that we don't have that he could bring.
So if I quickly look here, I think I've got it. So he averages 6.98 progressive carries per 90, which is more than any Arsenal sort of attacker. Again, the nearest to him is Saka with 5.04. Carries into the penalty area, I think, is a huge one, because especially against those low blocks and forcing the issue. And I think that's something that Arsenal really come up against in a similar way that we come up against them a lot, Chelsea, that you have to sort of find your way into the box and really carve out a chance out of nothing. Madueke with 3.92 carries into the penalty area. It was third in the Premier League last season behind Doku and Savinho. Again, for Arsenal, we've got Saka with 2.61. Everybody else is sort of, again, down from there. And then you go again to successful take-ons and shots, where he is top of those metrics as well. 3.58 shots and 2.08 take-ons per game. So it's really that directness and that level of ability to break down a low block, that I think he can really bring to Arsenal. It's a little bit different to the tools that you've already got in attack, where I think I said it in the last sort of section, that Saka and Martinelli are maybe a little bit more intricate, whereas Madueke is a little bit more direct and explosive, in the sense that when he makes his decision on where he's going to go, he will often force his way to that point, and then he can go from there as to whether he's going to get his shot off or then try to look to put a cross in or make a little clever pass.
Yeah, well, those progressive carries and carries into the box are one of his biggest strengths. I think against mid blocks as well, that's something that we've struggled, is to really run through teams. We're very good at passing the ball around the box, slow build up, control, retention, smothering teams. What we often struggle with are those moments within a game that we create something that sometimes just leads to a ball breaking within the box. It's not necessarily a clean chance. It's the ball literally bobbles as a result of someone forcing the issue. We did think Raheem Sterling could do something like that, but it turned out he just couldn't run whenever he arrived. With Madueke, this is a guy that he is clumsy. He's got big feet, long legs, very tall, kind of an unconventional winger's build. But how would you rate his, I guess, technical quality versus the aesthetic nature of it? Because this is a guy for me that is relatively technically sound, but it doesn't always look that way because he comes across as a bit clumsy.
Yeah, and I think that's bang on. I think it's the fact that it looks maybe a little bit like he isn't in control, when in matter of fact he is in quite good control of his body. It's just how it looks to other people. I think in terms of how he decelerates and accelerates, very, very good control of that. Sort of how his touch and things like that is usually fairly good. maybe the odd sort of lapse in concentration where it can go a little bit askew. But when he's locked in, it is very sort of strong and those technical qualities. Shooting, again, you see it in the drills as well, but he's got the ability with the sort of cutting inside on his left foot to sort of curl it towards that back post, in swinging crosses again on his left foot, and that ability to sort of pick something out when he's taken free kicks and things for Chelsea and even England and corners. So he's got that technical quality to pull off what's being asked of him. It is just a matter for me of consistency and how often you can sort of get that out of him at the very best level.
Yeah, well, again, I'm going to come back to shot volume, which we discussed in part one. The carries into the box often result in him shooting more than it actually results in him creating chances. That's a very different thing to what we've got currently. How much do you think that will actually impact and improve Arsenal? Because we draw so many games, we've dropped so many points from winning positions. We dropped 21 points from winning positions last year because we couldn't get that second goal quite often. Do you think a player like Madueke, either starting or coming off the bench, is the kind of player that can really break open the game and cause that chaos in the final third?
Yeah, I think chaos is a brilliant word for it. I mean, as you say, you dropped 21 points from winning positions. I think the other stat is that you was in a drawing game state for about 50% of your time. I think the only team that spent longer in a drawing game state was Everton. So the fact that you, again, either drawing 1-1 or 0-0, trying to find that breakthrough is a key part of your game. And that's why a striker has been quite high on your wish list. But with Madueke, I think, again, like we've said, the shot volume and that ability to drive into the box, it's a dangerous area on the pitch. Even if, as you say, there's a little sort of nick and it comes off and a little rebound, you could either get a corner, which we know Arsenal love anyway. So that's sort of a good thing in itself. You've got the fact that he can get into the box, get a shot off, and it might deflect, little bits of luck. But again, it's those repeated actions that give you more of a chance of finding that breakthrough. And I do think that is something, in terms of especially relentlessness, that Arsenal missed out a lot last season with the attacking, especially once Saka went down, because I think he's obviously the guy for that, to offer you a little bit more of sort of repeated, almost trying to push and force the issue. Apart from that, I think people can become fairly passive in attack.
Yeah, well, one of the qualities that I've really noticed with Madueke is he's very good at standing up his man and almost standing upright, facing them straight on, and then the next minute explosion, and he's straight past them. And it's a very rare trait. Saka's got a bit of this. Martinelli, by contrast, doesn't really know what to do. He'll take multiple small touches and then try and push it past his man. Where with Madueke, you can see the shoulders go on both sides. It's like, where am I going to go? How much do you think that, again, that arrogance will help with a low block or even a mid block that tends to drop in at times?
Oh, massively. Again, we saw it at Chelsea a lot this year. I think with the likes of Neto and Sancho, what would often happen is if they stood up against one of their men, they would either look to turn back because they'd sort of lost confidence, or they would look to pass inside and try and find a more intricate route. There'd be points where Madueke, even if he's 1v2 and he's got the support defenders, he would, as you say, stand them up and he'd almost try to, using his body, would try to isolate one of the defenders to then power past them and use that explosive turn of pace. And again, as I spoke about earlier, that ability to sort of shift his body in front of the defender as he's running sort of at them to then put them off balance and really drive through the momentum. It's those sort of actions that he can take two players out of the game on his own and then find yourself in a dangerous position. I think a lot of the angst that came from him last season was that he'd often find himself get to those areas. And then it was that little bit of decision making and that moment to slow down. I think because he's so quick and he's so explosive and everything going at 100 miles an hour, sometimes it feels like he lacks that ability to sort of slow down his mind and really make that next decision. And I think that's where the risk reward comes from that we spoke about, in terms of, can you get that next step out of him in terms of decision making, whether it comes to crossing, shooting, finding the pass. Can you, because if you can find that bit, his ability to get from point A to point B is, in my opinion, quite close to elite.
Yeah, and that getting from point A to point B, he's got incredible acceleration, like one of the best I've seen in the league. But he's also very quick over a long distance, which again, sometimes you see players that are very quick, like a Gyökeres, like a steam train. Once he gets his speed up, he just goes. But having that 5-yard burst of pace and a long range kind of sprinter vibe, that's rare to find in a player. How do you rate his ability on the counter when he is going in a straight line from that 100 mile an hour that you've just referenced to then the final action. Is that a problem? Is that something that he needs to tighten up on?
I would say that again, he's very good at carrying the ball forward and bringing it up. So again, those longer distances as we spoke about, which is very important, especially for I think for Arsenal, where in some games you can sort of really sit in and absorb that pressure. You've got the defensive unit to do it. So I think having those options, somebody who can carry that ball 40 yards on their own, 50 yards on their own, and get to the attacking third is really important. I think when it comes to maybe the final pass for Madueke is a little bit more if he's going at that sort of 100 mile an hour on the transition. I think sometimes he can either make the wrong decision or the technique can be a little bit sort of off. Where I think he is really good in transition is again sort of breaking with the team, and if he's the last action. So if you're to sort of on the break and then you release him and all he has to sort of do, he's attacking the box, he can take 1 or 2 touches and then he can get a shot off and he can go from there. I think he's a little bit more effective in that sense because he's not having to make that pass with more defenders sort of congested around him, and that he can sort of just go off instincts at that point.
Yeah, well, his assist numbers aren't fantastic. 3 assists last season, and he scored 7 goals, but 3 of those came against Wolves. I think he scored against Wolves again and against Southampton. So there is a reputation of a bit of a bully there, beating up the lower teams. But why do you think his assist numbers aren't great? Because I have seen some of Jackson's misses off the chances he's created. But I also see a player hitting 3.5 shots a game and 80 shots over the season and only scoring 7 goals. What's the reason for that?
Yeah, I think in terms of if we go into sort of his creative ability, I think his main tools in terms of being a creator is that ability to sort of fake that he's going to go one way, cut back, and then put the cross into the box. So I think, especially at Chelsea, Jackson lacks a lot of sort of aerial qualities in the box and even striker's instincts. So I think, again, with the missed chances, but also just not really having many players to attack those crosses. I think, again, this season with Delap coming in and players like that, it could have improved. And again, with Arsenal, if you get someone like Gyökeres, even though I'm not as high on Gyökeres aerially, I think he has the boxed instincts to sort of sniff out chances when that ball does come in from the cross, even if it isn't the direct touch from the cross. So I think his assist numbers in that sense could go up. But as you've also pointed out, the shots total, when it is that high and you are a little bit more sort of narrow-minded towards getting the goals yourself and being direct towards goal, it does come at a price of sometimes you don't see that pass, as we spoke about earlier. So I do think he is a little bit more sort of dialed into that. And I think if you're talking about his absolute sort of pinnacle where he could reach, it is more of that goal scoring instinctive winger who is scoring the goals rather than sort of being an elite creator, which I think is a little bit more Saka's game, for example.
Yeah, well, generally those players would be more inside forwards than touchline wingers, but Madueke is very effective as a touchline winger. He does give Chelsea a lot of width. And when I was watching footage of him playing on the left wing, even in the Club World Cup, he has hugged that touchline at times. Same on the right, and he can carry very effectively. But when I looked at the distances that he travels in, he does go infield, but he also is comfortable running straight down the line. That's what the data shows me. But I wanted to talk to you about Chelsea and low blocks, because when I was watching footage of Chelsea, what was really interesting was kind of reminded me of Arsenal a couple of years ago. The beginning of the season, teams were open against Chelsea. They weren't sitting really deep. Players had a lot of space. As the season came on, teams gradually started sitting further back, and back Palmer was doubled up on. Then Palmer didn't have the runners whenever the Jackson and Madueke injuries came. But Madueke was a player that seemed to be relatively good against low blocks because he can give you that width. And when he comes in, one of the things that I think he has that Saka has is that in-swinging cross.
Yeah.
How do you think he would adapt to Arsenal, where he would be playing against the low block almost every game?
I actually think he is fairly well suited against low blocks. Maybe, obviously, I think with most attackers, people sort of speak about, like, are they suited to a low block? I think if you ask many attackers, would they prefer to play in space? The answer is yes, of course they would. So I think it's more of a question of what can they offer you against the low block. And I think Madueke is one of those players that does have a lot of qualities with the carrying, with the persistence, with the shot volume that we spoke about. I think these are all qualities that you look for when you're trying to break down a low block in terms of how you're going to find that first breakthrough. So I do think that he can adapt fairly well, because he's also been through it at Chelsea, especially on that right wing, is maybe the only sort of talking point. is he's only played sort of a handful of games on the left. Some of them weren't against low blocks. So will it be easier to trap him on the outside, which is something we spoke about earlier? Again, that will come down to Arteta's coaching details and whether he can find the scenario. When you mentioned how he could maybe step inside and receive the ball, whether it's coming from Timber or Ben White, and it's going infield for Madueke to step onto, I think that is something that would actually really help him coming inside from the left and sort of attacking the box with momentum at that point. So it's definitely something he can help Arsenal with for sure.
Yeah, well, I looked at some of his moments as well whenever he cut inside onto his left foot. And there were quite a few instances with Milo Gusto just bombing down the right-hand side and giving him an option. 9 times out of 10, I was thinking, pass that ball. But he opens up his body. There was one he did score from it, but there's a lot where he gets a shot in. I'm not against that because I think that's how you keep defenders honest. You might give a pass 1 minute, you might have a shot the next. Does he need an overlapping fullback? Because Jurriën Timber, for example, is more of a defensive fullback. He'll cross from deep. He will get past his man the odd time and get to the byline and cut it back. Ben White is an overlapping fullback, but they're very, very different profiles. And they're also both very different to Gusto, for example, or even if Reece James is playing right back, very different to him as well.
Yeah, I think he's fine without an overlapping. I think that's actually kind of the allure with someone like Madueke is for a lot of the coaches that are trying to play with inverted fullbacks or sort of have them more central. It means that those wingers are going to be isolated at all times. So I think the players like Madueke who can force the issue, and as I said earlier, can not only go 1v1, but can even go 1v2. And I think that is something that's key when you're not going to have an overlapping fullback to sort of create those overloads or at least a 2v2 in those scenarios. Madueke is somebody who can do that with, again, it's repetitive, but with all the things we've mentioned in terms of his power, explosiveness, that is something that he can handle without the support. Again, with most attackers, would they probably prefer to have somebody run on the outside to take a man away? It helps. So, yes, but he can definitely do it without. And I think that's a big part of why you'd probably want someone like him.
Yeah, and that's something that Arteta values because we do leave our wingers isolated at times, making the pitch bigger. The Gyökeres thing, I think, is something that we're going to have to see how he adapts. But Madueke is a player that can get past his man and cut it back on his right foot. I think that Gyökeres just has that box instinct that he will run towards the ball, something that Kai Havertz doesn't have. Havertz is a player that does like to run towards the right. When he's playing repeatedly as a 9, he starts to develop it, but it's not a natural thing. You can see the kind of the cogs moving, and he will start to develop that movement. Kai's movement is much better outside the box than someone like Gyökeres, and I do think that given his shot power and so on, these things will come. But finally, I guess the key question is, what are the downsides of Madueke? What is the potential risk of this transfer? Because you've talked a lot about his strengths. To be honest, you've talked a lot more positively about him than I expected you to. But what are the real weaknesses in his game, and what does he need to work on for this transfer not to be a real flop?
I think it is just that decision making and that ability to slow things down, because I think that he can be very 100 mile an hour. And I think it's one of those ones where if he's not in great form, then he could again start to force things again. He's got the confidence, so it's not that he'll lose confidence. It's more that he will almost try to sort of make up for it because he's got that extra confidence. So I think it's just one of those things where you need to hone his mentality. And I think that there's quite a few things that can come into that. You could talk about, which we've said about his sort of how he is as a person, his mentality. I think that that's something, and his behaviors that could be sort of honed in on and helped. I think his right foot is another one that could do with some work. Again, that's kind of dependent on how much he's going to play on the left. So I think if we're talking about weaknesses to his game, it is a lot of decision-making things. Whereas when it comes to how I think the transfer could perhaps go wrong as a sort of a separate question, it would be how I think he develops as a left winger in comparison to what I've seen off the right. Because I prefer him off the right, and I think he has a higher ceiling off the right as of what I've seen right now. And as I've sort of kept alluding to, I kind of think it's one of those ones you need to keep half open, because if Arteta gets it right with him, the qualities are still there to work off the left side as well as the right side. So I think that's the potential downside of the transfer.
Yeah, it's funny because with Arsenal fans, I think the general consensus is this one depends on what else we do, particularly on that left-hand side. If we get Rodrigo or Eze, because I don't see both of them coming in, but if we can do one of those, Madueke and Gyökeres after adding Zubimendi, we become a very, very strong team. And I think the fear is that we're doing this now. Why are we doing it now? Because the Club World Cup's on. He's going to need a break. And this is where the fear has really kicked in with the Arsenal fans. And we've got a history of not fully completing a window. Chelsea buy freely. We don't always do that. In fact, we rarely do that. So this is one that I personally like Madueke. I did another scouting video on him where I looked at a lot of footage, looked at his numbers, and there's so much there to like. But it's one you have to see how they really adapt in your team. There's a risk to every transfer. And he's one that we need to see on the grass, see how he settles in. But look, big thanks for joining us. Please remind everyone where they can find you and exactly what you do again.
Yeah, so Connor Holden Football on YouTube for sort of all tactical videos. Again, a lot of Chelsea, but I'm trying to sort of really up the content in terms of other teams as well. Connor Holden on X or Connor Holden 00 is the actual @ I think. Again, just loads of sort of posts. And then you can find all my articles that I write on there for various sort of outlets such as Squawka and places like that. So yeah, that's where you can find sort of all of my portfolio.
That's great. Massive thanks for coming on. Really, really glad to talk to you. And you've given a lot of great insight into Madueke. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. And please join us again very soon.